the the third phase of her triphasic model is called reconnection. But that was written in 1992, and what we're looking at is actually instead of it being a repair to original functioning, what we're looking at is it is better than before, is to hopefully help trauma survivors to be better than they were before the trauma, and to actually evolve beyond just repairing the damage done. So, you know, the 150% I did. I don't know what that means. I don't guess it's for me. Advance. So, just want to ask for some, you know, that we've walked through and kind of looked at safety and stabilization, how that's, you know, we transmitted that, or kind of transmogrified that into the first and second stages, and then the Remembrance and Mourning kind of became the phase 3, stage 3 of looking at the treatment of criterion B and intrusive symptoms. And now we're moving on to the kind of reconnection. And for those of you that have read Judy's book and just kind of some ideas, I just want some folks to bark out, what are survivors reconnecting to, at least from that perspective, and your thoughts, you know, as you've worked with folks who are traumatized, what is it that they're reconnecting to?
Themselves.
This is the sharing portion of our show.
Just their own sense of themselves.
Nice. Yeah, what else?
Their community.
Nice.
So whether it be family, church, you know, whatever they're involved in.
Is there more?
Relationships with other people.
To other people, yeah. That when we start learning about that polyvagal response, you start seeing how important that being able to start to repair social and to not have to go dorsal and be able to be ventral and connect and start to use other people as a way to manage their own autonomic nervous systems. That's really important stuff. What else?
I always looked at the reconnection piece as being reconnecting to themselves, and also reconnecting to the primary relationships in their life. So often they are so disconnected or disjointed from the life that they would have had or could have had, that sometimes it's almost like an introduction to the new person that they have become.
When I was in my first year of recovery, my sponsor said to me, I remember I was sitting out in his car one night after a meeting, and he said, "Eric, you're either chasing your dreams or you're chasing dope." And that's always stuck with me, you know, for 28 years. And I think also there's that connection for trauma survivors, is that there is the rekindling of dreams, the rekindling of intention, the rekindling of purpose is also, I think, a really important connection piece. Go ahead and advance. I want to read through the next 2 slides, and then I just want to have some feedback on that too. This is from Judy's book, and this is interesting to me. Resolution of the trauma is never final. Recovery is never complete. The impact of a traumatic event continues to reverberate through the trauma survivor's lifestyle. Issues that were sufficiently resolved at one stage of recovery may be reawakened as the survivor reaches new milestones in her development. Next slide. The resolution is never complete. It's often sufficient for the survivor to turn her attention from the tasks of recovery to the tasks of ordinary life. The best indices of resolution are the survivor's restored capacity to take pleasure in her life and engage fully in relationships with others. Comments on that?
I think one thing that's really important in the reconnection piece, and that also speaks to this excerpt, is discussing the reconnection to consciousness and awareness. That even if I fall off, that I can get back up, and that it's safe to connect. It's not unsafe. I don't have to go back to the pattern, and that is exactly what the old behavior was, an old pattern. So often the disassociation and the disconnection becomes something that, we talk about all the time. It's not a conscious, intentional thing. So the reconnection piece has to do with reconnecting to consciousness and awareness and presence, to what is happening now, and not having to disconnect and go back to or go forward to, but rather being able to reconnect to this moment in time.
Nice.
Eric, I have a question. I'm actually I want to get your opinion. I was reading Judy's book today, and she makes a comment or she makes a statement, and I personally am battling about how much I believe it. And so I wanted to just bring it up tonight and see what your thoughts were. So she makes a statement and says, the identity that individuals with trauma have formed prior to the trauma is irrevocably destroyed.
And so I think that there's a really nice metaphor for that. And I think I've talked to you about it before. What I see when I hear that statement is I see Forrest Gump running. And, when Jenny says, run, Forrest, run, and he's got, scoliosis, and the doctors put those braces on him, and, and he breaks loose from those braces. And he's underneath there comes this beautiful stride that becomes his essence. So I think what she's trying to say is that, and she says it several places in the book, is that what trauma survivors have before they integrate and desensitize the trauma is not a self. It's a collection of spiny ectoskeleton adaptation stances to cope with the constant perceived threat that they're in. And as they start to integrate the trauma, and kind of what Andy was talking about, is it starts to be more here, now, and future focused. There starts to be this coalescence of intention that becomes something different than the collection of survival strategies. And so none of that shattered. I think that's a little bit of a hyperbole on her part. She writes well, and she writes with good language, but I just see that as a little bit kind of reaching of illustrating that what folks are after the trauma is categorically different. After healing the trauma is categorically different than who they were before the trauma. They're becoming a self. That's my read of that.
Can I throw in my 2 cents worth?
I was hoping you would.
If you think about it just from the brain science that we know, that the experiences that people have affect the way they organize the schemas of their life, their perceptions, their understandings. And while we can help them develop a freedom from not only the pain of that, but also kind of identify the strengths to help them move forward in a future that they like, none of us are the person that we were before the big events in our life. Whether that's a horrible event or a spectacularly great event, the act of living is constantly changing who we are. I think back what I thought was absolutely true 20 years ago, and I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that these are things I believed were absolute. And I have learned in life that they weren't. So I'm fundamentally different, and some of those things are because of great things that happened to me. Some of them are because of not so great things that happened to me. However, the process of moving forward really does remove us from ever really recapturing that naive, innocent child that we were at some point in our history. At least that's my 2 cents worth.
Cool. Agreed. So flip the slide one more. And this is my thinking. And if you back up 2 and compare that, recovery is never complete. I struggle with that. That yes, I am indelibly marked. You know, that was what I remember seeing Jonathan Shea and Bessel van der Kolk argue this point at ISTSS in Chicago. Vehemently, they were they were really pretty much at each other's throats. And you know, Jonathan was saying that he's watched combat veterans, thousands of combat veterans, have better quality of lives than they did before they were traumatized. And Bessel's saying the wound is forever. And I'm sitting there thinking, yes, let's hold the paradox of that. And that's, I think, the resting place, is that it's paradoxical, is that yes, the wound is going to be forever. And I'm always going to have those sensitivities. You know, I tell the story when I do training that when I come in late to Atlanta on Friday night, and you know, I've got a plane to catch, and I only have 15 minutes to get it. I call Margie and I say, "There's no way I'm going to make that flight." You know, that is the collapse of the space, the reversion back to a sense of foreshortened future and negative expectancy. That's a cognitive adaptive strategy to be able to cope with constant disappointment as a child. That is the reversion of that. But I'm also able to find some intention in that, and I've got a great quality of life, so that the 2 of those things are constantly, I think, in a dialectic with each other. That's at least my bias on that. You can zip forward a little bit there, Bob, to the next place.
There we go.
And this is just a couple of thoughts that Judy has about reconnection. These are not really kind of too important, but I just want to kind of to set the stage, and I'll read through these. Having come to terms with the traumatic past, the survivor faces the task of creating a future. She has mourned the old self that the trauma destroyed. Now she must develop a new self. Survivors whose personality has been shaped in the traumatic environment often feel this stage of recovery as though they are refugees entering a new country and emerging from an environment of total control. They feel simultaneously the wonder and uncertainty of freedom. I think that this also speaks to some of the stuff that Melissa was, you know, around that statement. This is all kind of underpinning to that, is that there is a cataclysm that happens with the healing of trauma. It is a coming out of it's a metamorphosis. It is caterpillar to butterfly. There is a significant shift qualitatively in the person. Next. And this is just speaking to mission. You can read that on your own, and just go ahead and move on, Bob. So I thought this was interesting, and I wanted to get some thoughts back on this. This was something that Judy quoted in her book of the 7 criteria. Now, this is 1992, but this is what Mary Harvey, a psychologist working with sexual abuse survivors, identified as the 7 things that define resolution of trauma. And physiological symptoms are resolved. Able to bear the feelings associated with traumatic memories, authority over the memories, so that the person can remember or choose not to remember. Memory of the traumatic event is coherent narrative linked with feeling. The damaged self-esteem has been restored. Important relationships have been reestablished, and a coherent system of meaning and beliefs that encompasses the story of the trauma. Thoughts on that?
speaks to your paradox, Eric, of is it gone or is it not gone? It's there, but it's a matter of recognizing, is it relevant? Is this going to be helpful for me to consider at this point, or is this a reactive response that I'm having? So I like the way that this is articulated.
What's missing?
Do we lose him?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I'm still here.
Okay.
I'm lost, but I'm still here.
I was going to say, I think one thing that's missing is the person's like willingness to give up that victim role. That I think I don't want to say like it, but I think they just feel so comfortable in that role as the victim and as the, I don't even want to say survivor. Just, it's like their trauma is so much a part of them, and they're so used to behaving the way they behave. To make that change, they just have to be willing to give that part of themselves up and to actually be a stronger person. And I have quite a few clients that I just don't think want to do that. They say, yeah, I want to get better, but as we start to work on it, they're like, no, I don't want to do that.
I think, Shannon, like what you're saying, I think some of it is that they build a connection around that. Like if they're going to support groups, or if they're, that's kind of who they've identified as. They've identified it as this as being a big part of them. And if they are quote unquote over it, feeling better, then they don't need the support of the support group anymore. And it kind of scares them that what's my new life going to be like?
I guess it's also, sorry. It's also sometimes necessary to live in denial if those recurrent memories get too strong. When one tries to detach oneself from past trauma, but I guess it will always be a part of oneself. The scars are always there, but nevertheless, healing can occur. Just that one might be able to encapsulate those wounds, and perhaps eventually help, let them dissolve.
When I look at this, I kind of lean into that it's an integration of self. That's what I feel is a little bit missing, because when I'm reading that able to bear the feelings and authority over memories and a narrative linked with the feelings, damage self-esteem, it just brings me back to what we have experienced is how we've come to be in the space that we're at. And so as we can integrate that and create this sense of this is me in my wholeness and my woundedness, then that's empowering rather than this and that. Because that's that binary thinking.
Yeah, accepting the whole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have a real concern when we start talking about the client not being motivated to change, because I think we hear that a lot in the world of mental health. And we have a lot of people that say, well, my client doesn't want to change. And I think what that really reflects on is we haven't made it safe enough, and we haven't built enough capacity in them to feel secure enough to move forward. So I always kind of interpret that, rather than me seeing it as a lack of motivation on their part, is seeing it as I haven't finished building an infrastructure that's adequate for them to really move forward. And then I'm getting frustrated at them because they aren't making me look better. So I think that's a thing that we need to really pay attention to, and when we start thinking of the client as not being motivated to move forward, is look at what have we done to help them be ready to embrace something different. And I almost always find the failure on that is not the client. It's my failure to adequately create the environment that's going to help them move forward.
I think one thing, I don't think it's a motivation thing. I think that change is always scary. So if you don't know what you're getting into, I think, and I agree with you, Bob, that it's a matter of us helping them to feel safe and feel secure in their newfound freedom. But I think that it's just a big fear people have of they've had this as their identity and what's my life going to be like. I don't think it's a motivational issue. so much as a what's life going to be like if I change.
Nice.
I would like to kind of,
If
Can I
I could say one thing, instead of looking at it from the lack of motivation, that I think that what Bob's saying and what Meg's saying and what I'm hearing is, let's look at it as the overabundance of fear. That yes, that's I think a better way of looking at that, and instead of doing it as a blame and stasis. That when you see it as an overabundance of fear and reversion back to procedural memory, they can't do anything new without having a prefrontal cortex, that they just can't do it. And so it takes us being able to help them to get out of that constant state of fear to be able to perceive and do something different. Sorry, Anna.
you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say it just like that.
You ready to move forward to the next slide, Eric?
Uh-huh.
Wait,
Great.
what's missing? Eric, what's missing from the list?
What's what?
You asked us what was missing from this list.
Oh yeah, that's what is missing. I'm
I don't
pretty
know.
sure that there
I'm
are
looking and I'm trying to figure it out.
Well, the biggest one for me is what I think is the land of post trauma is intention versus reactivity. That's what defines, I think, the difference between somebody who is surviving to thriving is where they are becoming more and more intentional and less reactive. So that's how I define it. And maybe that's the coherent system meeting, but that's also that's behavioral, and that's cognitive, and that's also kind of philosophical and self-oriented as well. That all of that.
Yeah, and I guess to help them make the transition, referring to what Bob said, also making sure that the environment is safe and there is a good level of trust is important, right?
And that should have been done in the first two stages of treatment. You shouldn't be here unless your folks have some degree of safety.
Mhm.
When you say safety, do you mean safety in sessions or safety in like?
Life, like Maslow's.
Okay.
But they should have by now they should have a felt sense of with you that you are safe.
Yeah.
Even with the most severe personality disorders, by the time that you are 8 or 10 or 12 sessions into it, you should be mostly a safe person for this. Even when you're zinging them, that you have established a predictability and that they kind of know that you're on their side.
Well, and I would say that, and I think it's not, maybe it was me, but maybe it sounded like I was saying that there was a lack of motivation. But I guess what I look at is I have clients that come religiously, like every single session, and they don't miss, and they, they're there. So I know they're motivated. I think a big thing is their outside life is sometimes, there's only so much I can do. There's only so much I can teach. But if they're stuck in situations that they can't get out of, maybe their children, abusive relationships where they don't have a whole lot of power, that takes a whole lot longer than just building resolution. They have to actually build a stable support system. And I can help with that, but that's like, 6 days. And is that me? Yeah, that must be my microphone. Sorry.
So Bob, move it. One more. So what I tried to do here is can folks mute, because I'm getting some feedback. Thank you. Wherever that was, that stopped. So what I tried to do here was to, Bob and I are just about to, and Andy are in the process of writing this right now. And I just wanted to think through what are the tasks of stage 4, and I just came up with kind of a list of them. I don't think that these are finalized yet, but this is kind of what I came up with for our model of the tasks that need to be done in stage 4, and that's a movement out of the past into present and future focused. And that we're doing an ongoing assessment process to see if there are intrusive symptoms that we have to go back to stage 3 and to integrate and desensitize if there's any kind of eruptions in the force that are coming forward and thwarting the survivor in their ongoing movement forward. The continued treatment in stage 4 is a process of doing direct therapeutic exposure and using reciprocal inhibition and helping. And what we're doing is we're coaching them to begin to confront the things that they are afraid of, and doing that in a relaxed body so that they're in the process of continually shaving off the intensity, frequency, and duration of these intrusive symptoms that are happening, as you guys saw early on, there's this ubiquitous, constant intrusion of painful past learning into the matrix of every day, every kind of waking conscious moment that we're perceiving threat, and the being able to start to regulate that so that we can have quality of life and comfort and be able to be intentional. And then I thought about another part of this is caring for ourselves. Stage 4 is where it really kind of moves into preventive medicine and dental care and eating right and exercise and, kind of all of that kind of external behavioral stuff. And then also kind of repairing and beginning to become intentional in relationships and being reciprocal in relationships and being able to function in that. And then some specific areas of cognitive restructuring that I kind of came up with is as was talked about, is resolving this victim mythology and paired with that is evolving out of the negative expectancy. That that all of that stuff is what I see as cognitive hypervigilance. That's what negative expectancy is. That's what foreshortened future is that kind of compressed view of the world of where the expecting of bad things is going to happen as a way of coping with disappointment and fear of things that are in the future. And then Bessel talking about, and the more that I thought about this, the more that I see it as a big deal. And I haven't quite put it together yet, but I'm going to think about it this evening. And this is actually one of the exercises that I'm going to ask you guys to do for the next week is looking at this process of compassion, and especially self-compassion, being able to look back at yourself with less judgment and more affirmation and more honorance of what you did to be able to survive, and this kind of embracing and bringing forward rather than the dissociation and suppression of the past self. The repairing relational issues, and then what I'll go into next week a lot is intention versus reactivity, and then developing mission. And then finally is developing an intentional resilience strategy for being able to cope in the world. And these are just some of the tasks that I kind of came up with for stage 4. Thoughts, comments on that?
I think I do have a comment. This has been an interesting part of the whole process because there have been 2 families that I have worked with because of being so new to the structure and how to work within the philosophy that have come into stage 4, and it is seems ambiguous. What I have found is that as I integrate this into my own experiences, because we can look at this and think, okay, that's fine and good. But as I've integrated this type of mentality, like we're challenged to do all the time, into how I'm living daily, this is going to make sense when we, as the healers, get to this point with our clients. So rather than kind of looking at it and saying, okay, I can see how that would look, if we live with that state of resilient mindedness, then it's very helpful.
It kind of puts an onus of responsibility on us to have better lives too, doesn't it?
I would
How
say
am I gonna-
unfortunately yes, but it's very fortunate.
how am I ever going to be able to coach somebody to do this stuff unless I'm doing it myself? And I can see holes in my life under every one of those dots, every one of those little bullets of where I am not, that I don't have excellence in any of them. I'm growing in all of them, but I don't have excellence in any of them.
Yeah, I guess each of us is fighting with everyday challenges, from day to day, and demanding from somebody else to be kind of almost perfect with especially these actions, caring for oneself, medical care, and mind, body, and so on, to keep healthy, to keep up with the well-being. That's certainly a challenge for oneself then too. And you can't convey this to somebody when you do not live, or at least really seriously attempt to live that. Yeah.
One of the things that I think is really kind of useful, particularly when we move into stage 4, is the understanding that it's not perfection, it's progress that we're looking for. And I know Kevin really likes, and I know the people that have heard me say this, are really, we're just looking to suck a little bit less each day. and that takes a lot of pressure off of people, is that I suck less than I used to, but I've been continuing to try to suck less since about 92, 93. And if I keep on this vigil, I probably will be there in about another 25 years. But that, it's not a process that you arrive at. In fact, it's just the opposite. The more you improve, the more you see you need to improve. And the goal of perfection, if that's really your goal, becomes further and further removed as you become more mature and more intentional and more deliberate. And I think that's a good thing for people to understand as we move through stage 4.
Yeah, accept weaknesses and dare to be imperfect. Yeah.
I am perfect at being imperfect.
And another way of saying that is, I'm not okay and you're not okay, but that's okay.
I'll go with that.
Next one. So, one of the things that was really interesting for me when I was working with Lou, and I did my year-long fellowship with him, I was doing a lot of this work on the front end of treatment. And what Lou was talking to me about, and what it took 6 months of him kind of banging it into my head, was, Eric, don't you think that folks would be much better equipped to do this work on the back end after their traumas have been integrated and desensitized? And that it took me a while to finally get that. And I'm just really clear about that. And he's got this really nice process of, these are the things that he identified as the kind of hallmarks of victim mythology. This is what procedural memory is for trauma survivors. And that's that kind of looking at oneself with criticism instead of being able to use the mohawk and to have honorance and compassion for ourselves. And then, carrying that even further is those of you who have worked with severely dissociative folks, that there's always some part in there that wants to kill the self, that there's this absolute revulsion and repulsion with self that is antagonistic and has this suicidal perception of the self. And I think that comes with, people who have severely traumatized, that being able to start to work that through as a strategy for coping, that suicide is actually and self-harm is actually a way out of the pain, is I think a really important step in this resolving the victim mythology. And The rest of those are pretty straightforward stuff. You know, I don't know anybody who is a trauma survivor that doesn't have addiction. That you know, there is some obsessive compulsive seesaw going on in the lives of people that are in that much pain and fear. Is that they are doing something they're using something externally to be able to soothe and medicate that state of constant distress, and being able for that to move out of compulsivity into intention. And those are some of the cognitive adaptations that we do in the final work. And move forward. So this is just a definition of post-traumatic growth. It's actually from Wikipedia. I'm not going to read it, but you can take a second to read that. This is, you know, this is this whole idea that is, in a lot of ways, it's the kernel of positive psychology. I mean, it's where positive psychology came from. Is this idea that a person can recover beyond their pre-morbid functioning, you know, that they can, that it's not just the repair, it's growth. And, you know, I remember when I first saw that, for sure, was working with the folks from 9/11, you know, of doing that work in New York, was seeing how that, you know, a lot of those folks were actually catalyzing their pain into becoming better than they were previous. Thoughts on that?
I think it's been one of the fun parts about doing this work is watching people move into this stage of post-traumatic growth where they discover so many new components that have been suppressed through the majority of their life, and watching them take those out and play with them and experiment with them and to discover how really marvelous and wonderful they are. I love that part of the work.
And you can skip forward. And that's the second half there, the developers of that whole idea. I wanted to take a second and talk about the SWLS. Has anybody used this instrument before? You used it, Bob?
I have, but I don't use it very often because most of the families, it'd be too unwieldy for them.
Yeah, get that. I love this instrument, and it's I think it's a really nice tool for stage 4. That Ed Diener did a really nice job with it when he developed this. It was way back in the mid '80s, but he did convergent validity with everything. So it's matched up with lots of different other. It's a shorthand for the GHQ, for the symptom checklist, for the Beck depression. It's correlated really highly with that, and it's just a nice tool to measure and continue to catalyze this kind of upward spiral movement of helping folks to kind of use this as an outcome measure in the later stages of treatment. And as Bob I hadn't thought about this. It works. It would be messy to try to do that with families. But with individuals, it works really nicely.
Yeah, it's a real nice tool for individuals.
And it's, you know, the nice thing is that Ed still holds the copyrights, but he has he's given it the ability to use it to any clinician as long as they cite him in the use of it. So it's public domain.
I guess with families, it would be interesting to do this with each individual, kind of sitting around a table and then talk about it, about the results, kind of, and see what is, where there are overlaps. Do you think that's possible?
My view on that is that when I do kind of assess them for life satisfaction, I want it to be integrative of everybody rather than individual reports.
Mm.
So this really isn't a very integrative tool. It would kind of depend on how you do family work, I suppose.
Yeah, when this one practice where family get together, once a week and check in or share, or the children are allowed to share their negative experiences or their, let's say, what they find aggressive behavior, or let the children discuss this. Yeah, that might be too abstract. Yeah. I'm not sure. I guess that might be too much then. But I thought perhaps just with the parents then afterwards.
And to be honest with you, when I do family work, I don't meet with the parents by themselves ever.
Yeah, okay.
We have all the family all the time.
You meet with all of them?
All of them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, different people do family work different ways. So.
Okay.
You'll see next week when I do with you forward-facing trauma therapy, I've used this instrument as a kind of as a cornerstone of catalyzing that process of being able to measure change and to be able to moves folks forward nicely. And it really does. As folks start to work through the forward-facing stuff that I'm going to show you next week, you just watch these scores just migrate upward, and it's pretty cool. It's neat to see that happen.
And it's good for documentation as well.
I just on the flight here, I just paid the guy, Jonathan Davidson, I sent him $50. And I have a copy of the Connor Davidson Resiliency Scale that I'm going to start using. I've got 200 uses of it, so I'm going to start playing with it. And I've just got it today, so I don't know anything about it, but I'm curious about how that's going to play out too. And I'm going to start using it with my forward-facing folks too.
Good.
And that's all I have to say about that.
So are you going to hang on for a while, or are you going to take
I've got 8%. I'm going to hang out till I die.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess it's I'll take over.
Here's the baton.
Thank you much. So what I'm going to do is talk more simplistically about what Eric has already presented, because we want to talk about some skills. Remember, this is in the consolidation of changes or the phase 4, we're actually dealing with people that have quite a capacity to regulate themselves most of the time, because that's what we've done by going through 1 and 2. What we've done in stage 3 is basically kind of given them experience after experiencing of being able to experience, review their narrative, and to begin to be less and less reactive to it. So when we move into stage 4, one of the things that we globally want to accomplish is to have them kind of consolidate the changes that they have made to date. And for me, this also is about helping them prepare to move forward. That forward-facing material that you're going to be exposed to next week with Eric, really, how do we help them kind of idealize or to identify the strengths that they have? And one of the things that I have found works so much better is if we can help people discover what their strengths are rather than tell them what we see those strengths be. And so this is part of what we would do in this consolidation of changes. So, and that's basically what I was just saying here. We need to help them identify their own growth and strengths. This needs to be discovery rather than instruction. and they've been moving through therapy with us, and if we've been kind of working in this way of kind of building capacity at each of the stages, what has happened is their narrative has changed. The narrative is no longer just them as a victim or is them as a sufferer, but they have also had us over and over again instill, if you will, or install thoughts about them being strong, thoughts about them being powerful and competent, and we have been embedding that throughout this process. So as we kind of move into this stage, we want to kind of look at helping them take all of that we've been embedding and actually give it a language. So kind of how I begin this with families is I go back through their trauma and loss and grief history and look at the lessons that have helped them move forward and have helped them define it. For example, a kind of common question that I might ask is, you've come to see yourself as being much stronger or much more powerful. What is the first thing that you discovered or first thing that clued you into this? And as we have those kinds of discussions, what I'm going to do is ask them to label that, to give it a name. Rather than me telling them what I think it is, I ask them to give it a name. And then I talk about, where else did they see this emerge in moving through this? Where did they notice they used this, whatever they've labeled it, in dealing with the trauma or dealing with the loss or reconnecting with their own history or who they are? And we want them to kind of come up with the labels. We want them to come up with the strength and define it. We want them to be able to identify why it's a strength or why it's a talent or why it's a capacity, because while we're identifying them that they experience, we're going to take all of those and teach them to employ them intentionally as we move into the forward-facing piece of this. In other words, it's one thing if I tell you that I've noticed that you really are strong, you're tenacious, you have the ability to proceed even in the face of struggles. But it's an entirely different thing if I discover that I've gotten through just about everything that's ever happened to me and I've survived and I can get through anything. That's a very different statement of strengths. And so you really want to focus in this stage 4 of helping them discover and helping them label. And you want to accomplish this in the 3 primary domains that we're looking at, which is first and foremost the how they see themselves, how they see relationships, and finally the world at large. What strengths have they developed? What capacities have they developed that help them see themselves differently? What have they learned that's been important to them, and what strategies did they emerge that help them improve relationships? And even how they are seeing the world differently. All of this is built through this process. What I find is once we get families kind of talking about these kinds of things, they kind of help each other discover, they make suggestions back and forth. And it's really pretty easy to have them break it down by person and by family, the strengths that they have. And I am not pointing any of those out. Those are ones they're emerging through a kind of a guided conversation in the session. And when they have, anywhere from 15 to 20 of these as both individuals and families, they are really ready to move into that forward-facing stuff that we've been talking about and being able to intentionally and deliberately apply these strengths, these capacities to really improving the future of their life.
Can I add something?
Sure.
A technique that I've used to do that's a lot of fun. In an art therapy group, that what we used to do was use butcher paper, and this was with adolescents, and we'd have them lay down on the butcher paper and draw their outline of their bodies. And then we would have them put whatever was not me outside of the line, and what was me or what's becoming me on the inside. And then we would cut away what was the not me, and to do ritual with kind of burning that. And then that we would post the me, and then they would add to that because it was posted in the residential treatment program. So they would have their own thing, and they would add to that. And then what I've done, a smaller version of that is in session with individuals, is to outline their hand on a blank sheet of paper, and to be able to do that same process. That's a kind of a nice visual and ritual way of consolidating that.
I like those. One of the ones that I use is actually kind of prepping them for moving into the future is one that once they've identified a bunch of these for both individual or family, then I begin to talk about, in the future, it's likely that things are going to happen. And how can you use these to help you deal with that? And I actually begin to ask them questions about what's the next most likely awful thing that could happen. And we begin to pre-install strategies. And I'm going to move to the next one. So this is where you want to help them pre-install future successes. So like I had one where it was a family of 6. It was a mom, a stepdad, and 4 kids. And we talked about what's the next most likely thing that could happen. And the 11-year-old daughter said, well, the next worst thing that could happen is the one grandma that I really like could die. And which, is possible. And then we talked about what strategies, what strengths that we have already discovered on our list could we use to deal with that? How would we deal with it? And we kind of pre-installed a strategy or a pathway to deal with it. And then I went back and asked one of her brothers, who was an older brother, I said, okay, what would even make this thing worse than that? And we did the same thing now that we made it worse. And we make it worse with each family member until the point where they actually start to laugh about, this has really kind of become almost absurdly problematic now. And they have 8 or 9 times gone through this, building kind of a pathway to deal with it. And I'll do that probably, I think with them, I did it 6 or 7 times on different possible future things. Now, if you're kind of consolidating that, what you're going to find your clients do more than call you in a panic because something awful happened, they call you and tell you how it happened and they dealt with it, which is kind of a nicer call to get, by the way. So ask them to review the list of skills and strengths, capacities, or talents that they have just been labeling. Then ask them if it would be okay. I always ask permission before I launch them into that activity, but that's just one example of an activity that you can use, is what's the next most awful thing that can happen? And then you let them build possible successes in the future with this difficulty, and you keep tweaking it using family member input. And it's a really nice way to kind of move people through this process. And what this does is help them set the stage to be intentional and deliberate use of these strengths, particularly as we get ready to move into the organization of a mission and how we're going to accomplish this mission, which is what Eric's going to talk to you about next week. We now have really concretized, if you will, these capacities that they have. And it's going to make it so much easier for us to move into that forward-facing, move into the future mindset if we are going to be able to use these things intentionally. And that was just kind of my little 2 cents worth on this. Does that make sense to people? What other questions?
Freaking genius.
Well, thanks. I don't know that it's genius. It's just trial and error applied.
It's genius.
Questions, anybody?
I think too, for those of us working in community behavioral health, what happens oftentimes is people go through therapy, they are discharged successfully, or they're in an RTC and they're discharged successfully. And then something happens. They already have a stack to pull from, and then this sets them up that it just creates that structure. So I think that it's just so helpful to create safety again around, that it's not bad or wrong. There's not shame in it. And also you have tools in place that are yours. They're not something I gave you. They're something that we came to bring to light together in this journey of exploration of therapy, the therapy process. So it can be really empowering to highlight all of these.
I have a friend who's in recovery. He's 30 years clean and spent a lot of time in prison in New York State. And anytime he introduces himself, he says, "My name's Joey. I'll always be an addict." And he's I love it. And one of the things he talks about is establishing in his recovery these new points of reference. And he just came up with that on his own. But it's really cool stuff of where he has a successful of, he was like most addicts, that there was no problem too big that you couldn't say F it to. It was always avoidance, always failure. And every time that there was a success, that started to build a new kind of little, a little benchmark in their lives that they could look back on of where they were able to be successful, and to be able to start to pull those out is what Bob's talking about, to give them those new points of reference. So they've got that their life starts to be peppered with these vistas of seeing how that they are able to walk through things. And that's categorically changing the way that the person looks at themselves in the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, if nobody else has any comments, are we ready to call it a night?
I don't know. This is a really good Valentine's Day dinner kind of thing.
I had mine served in bed.
Heart-shaped pasta.
I shampooed my carpets.
That is romantic. Can you
Think,
resend the PowerPoint? Because I don't know what happened. I know it was attached to an email, but I can't seem to pull the attachment off.
Well, I will send you this. Eric sent it to me, and I added my stuff and real quickly, and we kind of pieced it together because the system was being defunct, and he's sitting in the middle of the freezing. No, is it North Dakota? No, where are you at?
I'm not sure if I'm in Indiana or Ohio, but somewhere between the two.
In the church.
He's out in the middle of nowhere.
I don't want to hear it. I'm in Pittsburgh. It's just as cold here.
I'll be there in a couple of weeks.
75 here. Just saying. Flip-flops.
Shannon, you're not in a car. That's the difference.
Lost your connection, Andy.
All right, folks.
Well, let me just say that next week we'll do. I'm going to walk you guys through taking all of this into a structured process of actually turning mission into trauma treatment, and it'll be a lot of fun. So we're going to make this stuff that's right now kind of static into something kinetic, and how to actualize that in treatment. And it'll be a lot of fun.
Great. Thanks a lot, and happy Valentine's.
Thank you.
Adios.
Safe driving, Eric.
Thank you. I'm down to 2%.
Stay warm.
Thank you.